Hi, everyone. This is Tim Rodas, and welcome to Conversation with Tim. Every week we do this on Tuesdays at 7, and it's a different, could be a different topic every week. Sometimes it's, related to my church, sermon I preach. Sometimes it's spiritual things, and, a couple weeks ago was about praise and worship, and before that was about God's will, but before that, we was talking about economic development, right? So we cover a wide range of topics, and it's just where I bring on a friend or friends of mine, and we have conversations. And so the whole format is basically we just have a conversation. We're not trying to, we're not preaching messages, or we're not trying to drive home, those kind of points. We're just talking, and you get to eavesdrop in on us as we talk. So that's kind of the style we're trying to do, and hopefully as we talk that maybe some things come out that encourage you or help you understand, maybe make you laugh, whatever it is that it needs to happen that night. Tonight, well, obviously we're in kind of some crazy times, and a lot of division in our nation, a lot of darkness in our nation. Tonight, we're going to talk about, a very divisive topic, the topic of racism, and some of the topics that come with the topic of racism. And I have invited tonight two of my friends. Both of them are pastors in the Chicago area. And Adam, if you want to go ahead and bring them on. So up in the upper right-hand corner is Pastor Adron Robinson. Now, Adron is, I'll let those tell them about their church in a second. But he's a church at Hillcrest. And then down the bottom is Brian Price, and Brian is the pastor of Love. I almost said Love Chapel, but I knew that wasn't true. That's in an Elvis movie, I think. But Love Fellowship, and so I these are my friends from Illinois Baptist. That's where I met them at through IBSA, and I've obviously we're separated by distance. But I'm one of those guys that if you know Christ, the Spirit of God lives inside of you, that the spirit between people should witness with each other, and so these guys are my brothers, and I love them. And we're going to talk about a divisive topic, but you won't hear us being divisive. You're going to hear understanding. Like they know if I say something they don't agree with, they should push back. I want them to help me understand. If they say something I don't understand or I don't agree with, I may ask a question. Or I may just sit and listen, because I think that's what I need to do is listen. I need to learn, or I need to understand where they're coming from or their experiences. I don't know who may be watching. We obviously did live, so sometimes people watch live, and then more people watch, maybe on the demand later. But this is not the place to make any kind of snide comments or any of that kind of stuff. That's not how we roll. That's all we do here. We just want to bring hope and bring light in the darkness. And these are two of my friends, and these are people I want you to hear their voices. And so whatever platform I have that God can use, and use voices like this to help us understand, then I want those voices to be there. So with that said, let's just kind of start with Brian, because Brian and I, we have the same barber, and his head's a little smoother than mine maybe, but we got the same barber. So Brian, kind of catch us up a little bit. Tell me about, kind of what's your little bit about your background, your family. And by the way, just so these guys, neither of them have to brag a little bit. They both have their doctorate degrees. Brian's actually a PhD, right? So they're much brighter than I am. So if we start disagreeing, they're smarter than I am. So, so Brian, kind of catches up a little about your family, your church, and what you guys are doing.
All right, thank you, Tim. First, I just want to say it's good to be here, and we are appreciative that you would open up a venue for us to have this kind of discussion, especially during the times that we're living in today. So I appreciate you for that, and of course, I always appreciate my brother Adron for being here with us as well. So I am. I was born in Chicago, in the city, Jackson Park Hospital. And we lived on 35th and Rhodes. That's on the south side of Chicago, kind of near where the Sox play the ballpark over there. And actually, we were right across from there. And when I was young, probably second grade or so, second, third grade, we moved to the suburb. We moved to Bolingbrook. That area was getting bad, and I had older brothers, and so my parents, my dad especially, wanted to get us out of that environment if he could, and so we moved to Bolingbrook, Illinois, which was culture shock for me and my brothers. It was like night and day. So when we moved to Bolingbrook, we were probably, man, I think there was one other Black person that I knew, that I saw in the school that I went to. And it stayed that way until probably sixth, seventh grade. And around that time, more African Americans started to move to Bolingbrook. So that period from when we first got there to middle school was pretty difficult, actually, being the only Black person in that environment. And I can talk about that later. But so anyway, grew up in Bolingbrook, went to high school there, went to Romeoville High School. Romeoville is the neighboring town next to Bolingbrook, kind of the rival town. And where we lived in Bolingbrook at that time, the high school, the town was divided. So if you live on one part of the town, you go to Romeoville High School. You live on the other part, you go to Bolingbrook. So we lived in one area. I went to Romeoville for my first 2 years. We moved and I went to Bolingbrook kind of in the middle of my sophomore year, graduated from Bolingbrook High School and went on. I did some time in the military and the National Guard. And then I went to Southern Illinois University in Carbondale. And from there, met my wife, who wasn't my wife at the time, but met her, Tracy. We got married around 92. We've been married for 27 years. I have 4 children, all grown now. My youngest is 19 and my oldest is 27, and then 2 in the middle. And that's it. I mean, you want more?
Right. I mean, that's great. All right, Adrian, catch us up.
Sure. Adrian Robinson, pastor of Hillcrest Baptist Church in Country Club Hills, Illinois. Country Club Hills is a south suburb of Chicago, so we're about 20 minutes from downtown, maybe 10 minutes from the south border of the city. It's a town of about 16,000 people. Country Club Hills is mostly African American now, but it hasn't always been that way. It was mostly a Caucasian suburb that started to diversify over the years. Probably in the 80s, it started to turn and become a little more African American, a little more than half, I would guess. And so, as most towns do, when there is diversity in flight, the church remained mostly white when the suburb became mostly African American. And so at one point in the early 2000s, Hillcrest was probably 80% Black, with probably 15% Caucasian. Most of the Caucasian was leadership. And so that started to cause issues where people were always arguing. Everything became a Black-white thing until the pastor left. And they started a search for a new pastor. Around 2009, I get called to become the first African American pastor in Hillcrest's 46 years at the time, 46-year history. And I've been there for 10 years. Born and raised in Chicago. Like Brian, I grew up on the south side of Chicago. I grew up in the Auburn Gresham neighborhood. And so I was a little farther south than Brian. Walked to school, for grammar school, elementary. Went to a church in the neighborhood, a Providence Missionary Baptist Church, which is about a 5-block walk from my house. And grew up there. Went to Kenwood Academy in Hyde Park, which is a very diverse neighborhood in Chicago. It's the neighborhood where President Barack Obama lived. Neighborhood where the first Black mayor of Chicago, Harold Washington, lived. And so I grew up in a very diverse, I went to high school in a very diverse neighborhood, bust across the city to get there. But it was a great school. It was a very integrated school. So it was like going to high school with the United Nations. So everyone went to Kenwood. very academically competitive school, and so it was stimulated intellectually and socially to be there. Helped me open my eyes to how other people live. We got to address some stereotypes that we all came to high school with. You know, the Asian students, the Black students, the white students, the Hispanic students. You know, we all got to get to know each other, get to push past some of the common stereotypes that we had learned about one another, and then get to know each other as people and friends. And some of those friendships still last to this day. So I'm grateful for that. Went from high school, really tried to go straight to college, really wasn't in a college mindset, tried DeVry, wasted some money there, gave DeVry about a 1-year donation. I was really more caught up in basketball at that time than I was with school. And so I was doing, playing basketball in different tournaments and things like that around the state and around the country. And then started working at AT&T. Got hired at AT&T at the age of 18, year out of high school, and then started working there. No, the age of 19. So yeah, February of '89, I started at AT&T. Started work there. Then God called me to preach around 27, and so at 27, I went back to school to get my undergrad degree. The call to preach was always called to preparation for me. My pastor had already helped me to understand that. I went to DeVry University in Chicago, got my undergrad. Went on to Northern Baptist Seminary in Lombard, a northern suburb of Chicago, and got my master's degree. And then later on, after I called to Hillcrest, I went back and got a doctorate degree.
So kind of back up a little bit. Oh, by the way, tell me about your family. That you didn't talk about your family yet.
Oh yeah. Me and my wife Veronica, we live here in Chicago. I met Veronica at Providence at my home church. So we met in high school. We went out once in high school and figured that we weren't good fit for each other. And then she came home from college one summer. We went out again, and it was kind of like, yeah, she's nice, he's nice, and we both went our separate ways. And then at the age of about 28, we were all part of a young adult Bible study at our home church. They used to meet on Friday nights. And in that Bible study, we started to spend a little more time with each other, dive in the Word, and then we started to, have more conversations, get to know each other better. And we started dating then for real, and then got married about 2 years later in 2001. So yeah, we're coming up on year 19 in August by God's grace. Just two of us, no children, and most of her family lives here in Chicago, and then I've got family here. My sister over me lives here in Chicago, Nidra, and then my little brother, my oldest sister, live in Houston, Texas, and I got another sister here in Chicago, Esther.
Wow. So back up a little bit, because I've lived in the city for a little while, for 10 years, so I understand a little bit about this. But you made a comment about I live in this neighborhood, but then they bust me over to that neighborhood. So most of a lot of people don't understand why would you do that, and so kind of catches up with that a little bit.
Yeah, well, in my instance, it was an issue of the high school being what they would call a magnet school. So it was one of the schools that was trying to attract the higher rated students from the city, around the city. And so they gave us opportunity because of the high test scores of which schools they wanted us to go to, Whitney Young and Kenwood. Whitney Young being on the west side, Kenwood being on the south side. I'd never been to either, didn't know either neighborhood. We had to talk to my parents and my family about it. We decided to go to Kenwood. And so, I went to school on way on the other side of town from where I grew up. But it was more of an academic a magnet situation where they were trying to draw some of the brighter students in the certain schools.
Yeah. And my wife called it some magnet schools before. So what'd you say?
So I used to be smart. So
yeah. Yeah. If you don't live in a city, if you haven't lived in a city that had magnet schools, it's hard to what? And I mean, in Kansas City, they had themes like one was more athletic, and I guess if you was more athletic, you went to that one. And some had more of a science theme, and some had more of a like a drama and arts and music theme, and so if you were really high, they thought you were going to be a high achiever athletically, they put you here. If they thought you would be a high achiever in math and science, they put you here. If they thought you'd be a high achiever in drama and arts and music, they put you over there. Is that how it was in Chicago then?
Yeah, it's definitely that way now. I'm not sure if it was quite as developed when we were in high school, but yeah, there's definitely schools of the arts, schools that focus in mathematics and science, and yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So Brian, why don't you kind of usher us in just to, how we see the state of the nation, whether you want to kind of talk about what's going on in Chicago or just overall. And let's just begin with, obviously our churches were all going through the virus things. Have you guys started church back up yet? Or are you still just doing live stream? What are you doing?
We're still doing live stream. We're on Facebook Live and using Zoom as well on Sunday mornings, and then we use Zoom on Wednesdays and Sunday school, small group type things, and then meetings. So yeah, we're still doing that, and we will continue to do that. I anticipate probably July 1st, hopefully first Sunday in July, we'll be back in the building. We have a committee right now that's kind of working on procedures and things of that nature on what it looks like to be in the building. So depending on how fast they do their work, I'm hoping July. If it takes them a little longer, that's fine. But beginning to mid-July. Prior to that, we think we'll go to an outdoor service. So we're really, the sound people are working on that now. So hopefully by Father's Day, we'll have an outdoor, and I don't mean a drive-in, I mean just an outdoor,
Bring your own chair and
that kind of thing. Yeah, tent and all that stuff. So so that's what we're looking to do. And where we are so our church is in Romeoville, that neighboring town I was talking about, and we're not seeing the same type of cases as you would see in Cook County. We're in Will County. However, there are people that have gotten it, contracted the virus. So it's not as severe as Wright being in the inner city. But at the same time, we have, I just learned yesterday, actually, day before yesterday, that someone in my congregation did actually contract the virus. She thought that it was just pneumonia. I hope I can say this, but she thought it was just pneumonia. And then later on, she was retested and found out. Hope I could say that. Yeah.
We'll edit it out.
yeah, maybe we edit that out. I'm sure I was going to be saying stuff like that. But anyway, so yeah. But family members and things of that nature. So, but no one in the church except for that one person that I'm aware of. So that's what we're doing. And, I think people, we have some older people in the congregation, and then a lot of people my age, and then, quite a few that are younger than me. So it's kind of a mixed, feelings about how severe the whole thing is and what precautions we need to take. So we want to come into the building where we're being healthy and responsible, but not to where it's not to where you feel uncomfortable. You know what I mean? That kind of thing. So we want to take precautions and at the same time be able to worship and feel comfortable. So that's kind of where we at, and that's kind of the mood of the congregation, I think, overall.
Yeah. Are you guys in services yet, Adron?
No, we're in Cook County, Tim, and so we're still in the epicenter, especially in the south suburbs.
Yeah.
And so we're live streaming only with Sunday services, and then we're using Zoom for small group meetings. So we're live streaming to Facebook and to Vimeo each Sunday morning. And so yeah, we're hoping to start a slow reentry back into the building July or August. Right now, we don't even have a timetable nailed down. We were just in a meeting today with staff talking about some things we can do and can't do, and what it's going to look like going forward. So we've been taking this opportunity to take care of a couple of things around the building that we always wanted to get done. Now the building's empty. We've gotten one of the bathrooms, trying to get it more updated. And so things like that we're trying to take care of, so that when we're ready to come back, those things are already done and we're ready to roll.
Sometimes you just want to say thank God for Zoom. You know what I mean? Like, thank you, Jesus. It's
it used to be something I used, once a week for various meetings, around the country. You do Zoom or you do go to meeting, and now it's like every day.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So Brian, now go ahead and just talk about just kind of the, George Floyd is just the latest case. That was horrendous. That's murder. That's undefensible. All those kind of phrases. The height of the emotion kind of is gone, as far as like, we just saw it that day, and then, we've got some time now, but, so kind of what's the state of your church, your environment, how you guys are doing?
I think we're like everybody else. People are obviously angry and hurting and disappointed. The whole gamut. Um, we've had a lot of peaceful protests or marches, in our area in Romeoville and Plainfield and Bolingbrook over the past few days. And a lot of our folks have been participating in that kind of thing. And so, the same as anyone else would feel, I imagine everybody is, has their range of emotions and has their opinions on how things ought to be handled and so on and so forth. But, you've seen it so many times. You know what I'm saying? It's not new. And, me personally, I was telling someone that when it first happened, George Floyd, for that, when that happened, my wife, I'm kind of in one room and my wife is just in the middle of the hallway in her office. And I heard, I could hear her listening to something on the, news or whatever. And it sounded eerie, it just kind of, I kind of knew it was something, and she was kind of, making sounds and, that kind of thing. And then she called me to say, come look. And I said, no, Trace, I'm not coming in there. I don't want to hear that. And she kept saying it. So I went and I heard, and the more I heard it, I didn't even get to where the computer was. And I said, listen, I don't want to hear that. And so I knew what it was, I just knew. And so, and of course you're very angry about these things. And, yeah, so it's challenging, and to try to maintain some sort of Christian conduct and have some kind of a Christian response is very, very difficult for me. I posted something on Facebook. I felt like when as a pastor, and you know how that is, you feel responsible to say something, to at least to your people, to say something. And so I finally decided to say something, but I think whatever I said, I closed it with, I'm not going to say any more because I don't want to, go too far and offend and go beyond what Christ would have me, say. So it was very difficult, and it's still, if I sit and think about it, if I sit here and dwell on it, it's very hurtful and disappointing.
All right. Adrian, how you guys process it?
Yeah, we've been processing it slowly and trusting what God is going to do and joining in what God is doing. And so, yeah, when the incident happens, I'm watching on my phone, and then my wife and I start talking about it. And it's just, the reoccurrence of a long pattern of African Americans being killed by the police for minor offenses. And so, it stirs up the whole gamut of emotions from anger to lament that it's 2020 and we're still dealing with the same stuff that we've been dealing with for decades and even more. And so it calls us to do a few things. It calls us to gather together and pray. Like Brian, I took a social media day off because I was so angry. I didn't want to say nothing too crazy that I hadn't processed through yet. And so I was like, yeah, I don't want to really talk about this right now. And I had friends reaching out, from all over the spectrum, saying, how can I help? We'll get to that a little later. But yeah, it was mostly anger, sadness, mourning. There was crying out to God, how long we got to deal with this, and then disappointment in the church. that the church has been so silent on these issues for so long. In some areas, I would say, the church has been so silent on this for so long. So that caused me to be disappointed about some things too. But it also, caused me to go to my knees, to pray, and then to come out preaching. Which is how I usually process stuff. I jump into the pain, I pray, and then I come out firing. What does God's word have to say about it, and what are we going to do about it? Can't control what everyone else does, but I can speak into what Hillcrest is going to do about this, and then I can reach out to other pastors, and we can talk about how we're going to inform our people, and edify our people, and educate our people, so that this doesn't continue to happen.
Well, and just as a side note, kind of pause right there for me just to be able to say, for people listening, these are two men that I know love Jesus. You've heard them both talk about how they really worked at governing their responses, their emotions, their reactions, to do everything they could to be Christ-like and as they could in responses and those kind of things. Just imagine people who without Christ, or people who may know Christ but they're less mature, or words like that. The damage, the hurt, here was another situation or whatever. Just imagine, people in that environment, what they're dealing with. So sometimes, because in my little world, like you guys don't know, but Adron had a brother-in-law who died. So I don't know, that's not my brother-in-law. I don't know the guy, right? But he's a friend of mine. So, when I'm talking to him last week and he tells me about that, and, I hurt for that, Brian, when, he hurt for that, it's not because I knew the guy, it's just more that because I know Adron. And so, when you hear someone talk about, so they can look normal and cool and smile at you and all that kind of stuff. My phone is going off. I guess I didn't have it on silent. Sorry about that. When you hear guys that they're smiling and they're laughing and they're talking about preaching the word and all that kind of stuff, that doesn't mean there's not real trauma and real pain that they're also processing and helping others in their culture and their environment and their churches and their circle also. And so one of the things I want to have come out tonight is just I want them to all talk about that and what that's like. And I want them to be vulnerable, and I want us to hear and listen. I want to hear and listen. And so we all three of us come from what we'd call a biblical worldview. So we're not coming at this as politicians, and we're not coming at this as, we have all those opinions, and we'll talk about some things that may sound that way a little bit, but we're going to come at it from a biblical worldview. So we would believe that the battle's not really flesh and blood, it's powers and principalities. Mm-hmm. And if you don't want to believe that because you don't know, that's fine. There is flesh and blood, and there are organizations and things and systems that are problems. But at the end of the day, what divides us and what would keep us from solving problems or whatever it is the work of the enemy. Would you guys agree to that? How would you? Well, I just kind of said it, but would you push back against it, or do you think that's true?
I would agree with that wholeheartedly, and I think that that I would, in my agreement, I would definitely join those two things together. That whatever is happening spiritually is influencing. You know what I'm saying? And
Agreed.
so we have to kind of deal with them, understanding that it's not an otherworldly situation, but it's something otherworldly that is impacting our world. So that as we are praying and seeking the Lord and preaching through, we are taking action as well. You know what I'm saying?
Yep, absolutely
so true. Both and because what's spiritual is impacting, what is natural, if you will.
Yep. Adron, you agree with that, or?
Yeah, definitely agree with that. That everything that we're seeing manifested in our nation, in our world, is influenced by what we don't see. The prince of the power of the air controls culture. Satan controls culture and is influencing people and systems. And so when I see the police violence against citizens, I understand that it's satanic at its root. Anytime someone doesn't see another human being as made in the image of God, or sees them as less than made in the image of God, I understand the root is satanic. Even though the person committing it might not see it as satanic.
Right.
Right. And so I understand the root of it. And the fruit of that thinking is that, I can kill anyone I want. And then, even if it's videotape, get away with it because there are systems that are going to say, because I have on a badge and a gun, that I must be right. And so I understand the spiritual dynamics behind that, whereas some people have a hard time thinking that the police do anything wrong, as if putting on a badge and a gun makes you a moral person automatically somehow, and it doesn't. There are fallen human beings in every profession in America. Some of them wear badges and guns. Some of them wear clergy robes, and so you can't assume that someone is righteous or upright just because of the job that they do. You have to check the content of their character.
Yeah.
So, you mentioned kind of about systems and things like that. So, I posted a video a little earlier today about trying to help people understand what, when somebody uses the phrase systemic racism or systemic problems or issues or whatever the phrase is that someone uses. I posted a little video kind of help you understand it today. But can you just kind of talk about what that means when you talk about systems, things you grew up in seeing, stories, maybe, you can leave names out, stories or experiences that you guys would have that just kind of help us understand from your perspective, kind of how you would define some of the systemic racism or failures that are, whether, it's oppressing or undermining or whatever the word is, the culture you live in.
Me first?
Whoever wants to go.
Go ahead, Mr. PhD.
Oh.
Take all his thunder, brother.
I think what you guys don't realize is I'm the one who has the most debt. That's the only difference. I got the most debt. That's an interesting question. And so, understanding systemic racism, institutional racism, that which is kind of ingrained into our culture and sort of permeates every sort of aspect of our culture because it's ingrained in the minds of people over time. And there's probably more we could say about it, but I just from experience standpoint, just one thing that kind of always stands out to me when I'm asked that type of question, and an example that I like to give. I worked before pastoring. I worked in telecom as well. I worked for a company called Williams Telecommunications that eventually became WorldCom, and then Metro Fiber Systems, and then MCI. So a series of buyouts. But anyway, so I worked in that arena, and was kind of, and I was at one point I was working with a little startup company, probably about 500-600 employees at the time. And so I was very involved in what was going on, and I was very close to kind of the executive people and all this kind of stuff. I was in the engineering department, and it was me and another Black engineer, and we would sit in rooms where we were the only African Americans there, and so you're always when you're kind of at these tables and there's decisions being made, and so they kind of ask your opinion and then you give it, and then it's always like, are you sure about that? Where they don't, that's not how it happens with everybody else, you know what I mean? Or if you do something good, you're praised as if though like it wasn't expected that you would do a good job. Other people do things good all the time and no one see, but when you do something, it's like, oh, wow, that was just a great thing. And so, and for a long time, I just thought it was, me. But I have a friend who was in the army. He was a lawyer, JAG officer in the military, and became a captain and was in Desert Storm. And we would talk from time to time. And his responsibility, I guess, he had something to do with making his commanders aware of the legal ramifications of blowing stuff up, basically. So if they were getting ready to shoot a missile or whatever, he would kind of have to say what the legal ramifications were for that. And he told me how he would always get second guessed and always get questioned, whenever it was his time to make a decision or give a recommendation. And so I just realized over time and talking to others that that's kind of there. It's assumed, and I don't know if it's intentional. I don't think it is intentional. I think that's what systemic racism kind of is. It's something that just happens because you're the only Black person in the room, and you can't possibly really know like your white counterpart would know. You can't possibly be that smart, and so you kind of go through life experiencing that kind of thing. So I think that's kind of one example, maybe.
Adrian?
Yeah, well, like we were talking before, growing up in the city of Chicago, you see a lot of things. So Chicago is a very diverse city, but its diversity is separated. And so there are the African American neighborhoods and the Italian neighborhoods and the Asian neighborhoods and Hispanic neighborhoods. And there isn't a lot of mingling of the ethnicities in different neighborhoods usually. And so what we found out growing up was that certain neighborhoods had much more resources than we had. And so people say, oh, well, that's, they worked harder than you did, or they did this, or they did that. And then you grow up and you see more and you understand that, no, they didn't work any harder than us. It's just that their neighborhoods had schools with, computers and up-to-date books, and our schools had like the old books that their school got through using, that we had leftover materials, that we had leftover teachers, that we had the substandard hospital in our neighborhood and things like that. And you start to ask the question, well, why is that? And then you do a little more digging into city planning and how all that's set up, in Chicago and downtown and back rooms and conversations, and who decides what money goes to what neighborhoods, and who decides what neighborhoods are going to be gentrified. Those neighborhoods that were connected real closely to downtown, like Cabrini Green, which is one of the most famous housing projects on the west side of Chicago. So when we were growing up, Cabrini Green was so bad that we barely went there. I lived on the south side of Chicago. You didn't go to Cabrini Green. I dated a girl once that lived in Cabrini Green, and I would drive by and call her when I was coming around the corner, so she would come out and get in the car so I could drive away. It's like, this time in Cabrini Green, even as a Black man, we were afraid to be there at times. But now they've re-gentrified that neighborhood. Cabrini Green is a high dollar neighborhood where I probably couldn't afford to live, and so people in power redrew the lines, cleared out Cabrini Green, so they let the services dry up. Grocery stores, hospital, police care, all of those things until the neighborhood got so bad that everyone moved out. Then they buy up all the land, they hold on to it until it bottoms out, and then they turn it over, build up brand new apartments, condos, and all of a sudden all resources come back. But then it costs so much to move into that neighborhood that the original residents can't live there. And so those things don't happen by accident. That there's a system in place that allows those things to happen. And it's often motivated by racism and by greed, not looking out for what's best for that community, but looking out for what's best for the minority or the people in power.
Yeah, that stuff's hard. I mean, I get. If we're thinking about just economics, let's just say, and I can see some developer in some room thinking, "Hey, we can devalue that property. I can buy it for less and do this with it." Okay, but man, I just, So like one of the things that bothers me that I know about, so I don't know, I don't have those experiences.
Yeah.
But I know, like, after the war, World War II, a lot of Southerners, various places, moved to Chicago, places like Chicago, to get factory jobs, and they were going to retire the entire time and move back. So they may have been there 40 years, 50 years, raised families there, but they knew the entire time, when I retire, I'm moving back to, North Carolina or West Virginia or Kentucky or Tennessee or Alabama or wherever they came from. And, like guys like us, we have a good friend, I just lost his name, but pastor at Calvary in Alton. You know what I'm talking about. If you go by that church looks like, if I blindfold you and drive you around for like 14 hours, pull you up in front of that church, we walk out the door, and I say, this is First Baptist Church of someplace in Mississippi, you'll think that's exactly where you are, because that's the way the building, the structure, the inside, that's what it looks like, because it was built by people from Mississippi. And that's just the way it is. So anyway, I know stories, personal stories, where people who lived in Chicagoland area, particularly, call themselves followers of Christ. My dad, I never told you guys this. I was born. When I was born, we lived in Calumet City, so I only lived there for like 3 months. Okay, is that close? Can I say I'm from the South Side, or is that not South Side? That's South Side, isn't it?
Yeah, Calumet City is about 10
I'm
minutes.
South Side too.
There you go. You're South Side too, Tim.
See, I knew we were like kindred spirits. Anyway, so my parents lived in Calumet City, and my dad had been there for a while. My mom and dad had been there for a while, and my dad had worked in a factory as a welder. He was called to preach at a church there in Calumet City. That's where he began his, and his pastor got him doing the things and preaching around. So I got roots that start there, and then we moved to Kentucky after that, because the first church, my dad went to Bible college and got a church and things like that in Kentucky. Well, anyway, the thing that just kills me is when I hear all these stories about these churches that seat 200 people that have 8 people showing to them, because they didn't ever transition. They never reached their community. They built a church for them.
Mm-hmm.
And we're white from Mississippi, or we're white from Kentucky, or we're white from Tennessee, or we're white from Alabama, or we're white from North Carolina, or wherever it is. And then as they all retired and moved away, and then black families moved in, kind of like Brian's family says, hey, I got these boys, and to protect them and them not get caught up in a bunch of stuff, I want to move out to this other town. People did that. And instead of the church engaging them and reaching people for Christ, I mean, that's a version of systemic racism, isn't it? I mean, it's like, what are you going to call it? Just apathy, or I don't know what you call that, but it kills me when I think about how many churches there were, Southern Baptist churches, for instance, in Kansas or in Chicagoland, that they got 8 people going to them, and because they never reached their community or whatever it is. And like the church that you're pastoring at, after what you say, 46 years or whatever, you're the first black pastor. But as the community changed, at least that happened, and your church transitioned instead of just completely dying. But it wasn't then what it is now. I mean, you had to revitalize that church and redevelop it and stuff. Anyway, I'm sorry, I got off tangent, but that stuff kills me. I mean, I just don't understand how people who love Christ can't. I just don't get it. So I'm sorry.
The sad commentary to that, Tim, is that neighborhoods usually change long before churches do. And so you can look in the history of Hillcrest, and I've talked to a few people that were on staff there back in the day, and they said, well, yeah, we had Lifeway come in and do a study. How can we revitalize our church? How can we reach our community? And the study basically came back and said you need to hire an African American pastor. The suburb has turned African American. The church is mostly Caucasian. It's definitely Caucasian run. And it was like, you guys need to hire an African American pastor. And they finished the study, paid the guy from Lifeway, said thank you so much, and then went and hired another white guy. It's like, no, we're not doing that, because so many churches exist to keep themselves comfortable. It's like, like you said, we're from Mississippi, so we're the church for people who grew up in Mississippi and moved to this neighborhood. So as long as you think like us, act like us, talk like us, you're welcome here. And if you don't, then you can go find somebody else's church. And so there are so many churches like that around the state, around the country, that are dying on the vine because they refuse to reach their communities. And so at one point in time, the Lord touched Hillcrest's heart, say, hey, we got to reach our community. And so by God's grace, they called me, and God allows me to be a part of that. But the first thing was getting out, let the community know that we love y'all, we care about you, we're here for you, and then helping them to understand that there's been a transition here at the church, and now we're trying to reach our community for Jesus Christ. Because a lot of people in the community, it's like, we know the church is there, the church has always been there, and the church didn't want anything to do with us. So what's different now? So yeah.
And I think one important aspect of all of that is when you talk about churches and transition and pastors, and what will happen. We can probably count on maybe two hands around the country where there is an African American pastor that pastors an Anglo church, a predominantly white church. And even in those instances where there are sort of the real, and I hate to use the word power, but that's what it is, the real power of the church, the real leadership probably is still white, you know what I mean? And so it's that question has to be asked. Why is that? Why is it that if a black pastor is there, white people feel like they can't follow? You know what I'm saying? Can't be led. And I think that's part of that whole, you don't come out and say that necessarily. You don't say, I don't want to be led by, but it's something probably with just in your psyche, you know what I mean, that says we got to go somewhere else, so you can have it. Black people will be invited to come bring their choirs and sing and all that kind of stuff. But when it comes to actually, even to come preach, but when it comes to actually leading a white congregation or white, it's a rub there. And so I'm sure Adron has probably seen, I don't know how many white people still are in your church, but it's probably not the same they used to be,
Yeah, I literally just had this conversation yesterday with some other pastors. One of the guys I just met, the other two guys I knew well, and so we were all together. And the guy who I was just meeting asked me where I pastor, and he says, "Okay, is that a NBC church or an ABC? Is it National Baptist or American Baptist?" I said, "No, it's a Southern Baptist church." And his eyes kind of stopped. He said, "Really?" And I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "Do you pastor a Southern Baptist church?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Where is it?" I told him where it is. He goes, "Oh yeah, I've driven past there before." He said, "I thought that was a white church." And I said, "Well, for a long time it was, but now it's a church. It's like we allow anybody to come." And he asked me, "Well, how many of the white members are still there, and how many of the other leaders are still there?" And I had to let him know, "Hey, well, there's been an exodus from the first year I got there. The leadership was majority white. So chairman of the trustees, chairman of deacons, things like that. Those leadership positions were mostly held by white males, and most of them left not long after I became pastor for the very reason that Brian spoke of. That it's harder for a white man in America to follow a black pastor than it is for a black man in America to follow a white pastor." Mm-hmm. Because of the ingrained superiority theory.
Yeah, that's hard to get your head around if you haven't dealt with that. You know what I'm saying? That's just hard to get your head around in rural America. Sometimes just how real that stuff is, and I'm sorry, I don't have words for that, but you say that stuff, we've all seen it someplace,
Yeah.
played out, when you describe it, oh yeah, I saw that happen. I didn't realize what it was, maybe, but I saw that, or, whatever. But I just, I think about, time, like in IBSA, we'll hear those stats about how many lost, the lostness in Chicago land and things like that. And, I don't know how I grieve, because reaching the unchurched, de-churched people is kind of a big deal to me. And I grieve when I hear about there was this many Southern Baptist churches of people who supposedly love Christ and all that kind of stuff. And, they would give money to go, for missions overseas or wherever, but they weren't reaching the lostness in their own community, regardless of the color or the culture that was moving. I mean, that just blows my mind. Just blows my mind. And so, anyway, let's we don't have a lot more time, but I want to kind of touch another thing. Help people understand. Okay, so people who would say, I believe Black Lives Matter, using that terminology.
Mm-hmm.
And then we get caught up in, well, if someone says Black Lives Matter, then that means someone else needs to say Blue Lives Matter. And if you say all lives matter, they don't want you to say that, because that means you're saying that Black lives don't matter enough, because we need to emphasize Black Lives Matter. But then you got some of the political baggage of, defund police, or all cops are, bastards, or some phrases that's like, I can't go that far with you, but I believe that life matters. And I'm not trying to get political about this piece of it, but, if someone says all lives matter, then it's easy for us to turn and say, well, what about unborn babies' lives matter? And they don't want that. They don't want that. They don't want to have that conversation. So to me, it's just, there's this division. And I know a lot of people who they want to stand and celebrate and say Black Lives Matter, but they don't want to be attached to the politics that come with that, or the divisiveness that comes with that. Does that make any sense? What would you say? So to me, I'm that way, right?
Yeah.
I'll protest with you. I love you, and I will stand with you any day, right? But I don't want to be attached to the politics that comes with some of the stuff that, because you guys are, it's not, I'm not standing with you because you're Christians, but you see I have a biblical worldview. It's different in your politics. It's just different. So how would you try to encourage me, or what would you say to me as a way to me to kind of work through that kind of process? Because I'm sure there's others listening that are in a very similar place.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, first of all, because we're looking at the world from biblical worldview, I'd say it this way. When we say Black Lives Matter, we're saying that because Black lives are the ones being devalued in American society right now. And so people retort and say, well, Blue Lives Matter and all lives matter. America doesn't have a problem accepting that all lives matter and that Blue Lives Matter. But America definitely has a problem accepting that Black Lives Matter. And we see it in how Black life is treated as less than so many places, how easily Black people are killed for the minutest of reasons, how Black people are often denied justice, often denied equal pay or equal resources. And so sometimes people will come back and say, Blue Lives Matter or all lives matter. But what they're really doing is fighting against the truth that Black lives matter. So Jesus tells the parable in Luke 15, the shepherd who leaves the 99 to go after the one. And nowhere in the text do we hear the 99 sheep saying, we all matter, don't leave us, but the 99 were safe, and the one was in danger. And so Jesus left the 99 to go after the one because the one was in danger. So when we say Black Lives Matter, we're saying that because right now our people are in danger. And no, I don't agree with everything of the official Black Lives Matter movement. The movement itself has gone into areas that don't represent me or most of the people that I preach to every week. And so I'm not saying I agree with all the political of the official movement, but I do agree with the truth of the basic statement that Black Lives Matter, because we're created in the image of God, just like every other human being. And since we're the one in danger right now, that's the cry that Black Lives Matter. So I would separate the truth of the statement from the issues of the movement, and then how we live, how we treat Black people shows if we believe that their lives matter or not. And how you treat them on a daily basis. And the church should be the first one leading this charge. Because from my view, if the church gets it wrong, the world will never get it right. So we have the eternal Word of God and the Holy Spirit residing within us. And so if we can't look at things with biblical clarity and holy discernment and figure out that it's wrong for one man to commit a mass murder and walk into a church service, during a prayer meeting, shoot up the church, police find him later, take him to Burger King before they take him to jail. And then another man is accused of passing a $20 bill as counterfeit. And then the police murder him on the street on video, in the name of I was trying to stop him from resisting. And so there's definitely two different standards of justice being issued in America, and that's what we're calling for them to.
All right, Brian, you want to add something to that?
I would agree wholeheartedly. I think that to me, it's I struggle with the whole Black Lives Matter movement, and it's a shame. I think that the church somehow we have not been sort of cutting edge and leading, so that we're kind of jumping onto something that's there that a lot of us probably don't necessarily agree with politically. You know what I'm saying? And yet in an effort to be present, and to sort of lead our people and speak into certain aspects of that, we kind of latch on to it. You know what I'm saying? So I think where it's a shame that we have not come to a place as the body of Christ to come and lead something. I think on Facebook, Pastor Allen Uptown, he was involved in something that happened on the north side, maybe today or yesterday. And some churches came together and they did something out there. And I think that's the kind of thing, not necessarily has to be a march or anything, but I think the church needs to lead on that so that we don't have to latch on to something that we would not agree with necessarily politically. But I agree with Adron as far as, my kids, when they were growing up, one of them would get in trouble, right? And so I'm dealing with that one, and they would say, well, what about so-and-so? You never said anything to her about her. You never said anything. And I would tell them, listen, right now I'm dealing with you. If there's an issue with your brother or sister, then you should bring that up at another time. But right now, you're the one who is in trouble, and I'm dealing with you. And I think that that's what we're trying to say when we say Black Lives Matter. We can't deal with blue lives right now, because right now, at this particular point, something has happened to a Black man or Black woman, and so we can't just stop and turn our attention to something else. You should have brought that up another time. You know what I mean? And so I think it's just it's not. It doesn't even make sense to do something to just turn the attention. That happens.
That's the hard. One of the hard parts is when, like you said, a phrase because the church didn't do something or whatever, a phrase gets hijacked, becomes political, or gets attached to things that aren't really like. That's not what I believe, but I believe this. It's hard. It's just a mess. So, well, I'm. There's a lot more things we can talk about. Obviously, I want to give you guys opportunity. I want us to, and we're going to go longer than we usually go tonight. But I want us to have an opportunity to turn this back to hope. I believe that the local church is the only hope of the world, and I, I don't know what my church can do, I don't know what I as a leader can do. I'm willing to do whatever I can to, whether it's what I say or giving, men like you voices in my culture, the neighborhoods I live in. Whether it's our church, gathering for, prayer or whatever it may be. I don't know what I can do, but I believe that the local church is the only hope the world has. And, I think about kind of like, one of the verses, I can't think of it right now, but just like it says, I talk about bear one another's burdens. Mm-hmm. I guess how I feel about it, that terminology really is like, picking up the extra weight for somebody. Like, it's like you're carrying something that's really heavy and it's a little too heavy for you. And so I pick up part of it to carry that weight for you. I can't take it off of you, but I want you to know I'm in the fight with you. I don't know what I can do, but I think that every pastor should be speaking. I think every person who's a follower of Christ, we should be brokenhearted over the culture, over the brokenness of our nation, all that kind of stuff. And, I do believe it's spiritual, and I do recognize that it's attached to real people and real organizations and real whatever. But the church has got to be the one who stands up, and we've got to be the ones who point people toward Jesus. And as a follower of Christ, I mean, racism's wrong regardless, but as a follower of Christ, it's like another level of wrong. If you claim to be a follower of Christ and yet you can't love someone, or you judge someone, or you whatever, just because of the color of someone's skin, it's mind boggling to me. But anyway, so why don't you guys have a few minutes to, whichever one wants to go first, and let's talk about, the hope that you see and where you want to see things go, or what God's stirring in you as we move forward.
Well, I appreciate again your sentiment. And I believe I did my dissertation on Gardner C. Taylor, who was one of the probably greatest preachers in our generation. And something that he said, he was very, very involved in civil rights movement and that kind of thing. And in one of his sermons, he said that the day of the national utterance is gone. In other words, the Dr. Kings and that kind of thing, he believed that was kind of slowly fading away. And he said the real fight, if you will, the battleground would be in the local church with local pastors dealing with their congregations in their local communities. And so I believe that. I believe that it begins, as Adron said earlier, I believe that, as Taylor led by preaching, led his people and led his sphere of influence through his preaching, I think that it begins with preaching, and that's how we lead people. But I think that what happens and what can happen is that people who hear and are changed by that can do things like what you're doing, although you're a pastor, of course, but can this three people together having this kind of conversation, and then, of course, it being heard by others, I think that is much more influential and much more substantive than even perhaps a protest, because this is actually doing something. You know what I'm saying? People are kind of hearing a dialogue, and you're taking action. You're kind of demonstrating how you can invite people into a different space. So I think that that's what the kind of thing people need to see. And I think that is where heart change takes place. Now, depending on how you read the scripture and your eschatology, will things get better or will they get worse and that kind of thing? So does that mean that racism and all this is going to be eradicated on this side of glory? I'm not sure. But I think that as we are called to bring the kingdom of God to bear and to live as kingdom people, I think this is kind of what we're supposed to be doing. So I have hope with things like this. And whenever I'm invited or wherever I'm asked to, or if I'm just having a conversation with someone who's not like me, and that conversation is in a genuine, authentic, wanting to kind of dialogue and learn from each other, because I know that that's going to go somewhere. You know what I'm saying? I know that that person's going to go and talk to someone, and I'm going to say something to some of my colleagues and my peers and say, well, you know, I talked to so-and-so and they think differently. You know what I'm saying? And so we get to know that everybody's not necessarily thinking the same way, and that all of that changes minds and hearts. And I think that is the gospel in action. You know, it's one thing to say that everything, you know, the gospel is the center, but what does that look like? And I think the gospel in action looks like the things we're doing right now. You know what I'm saying? So that's kind of my thought process.
Let me add one more piece before Adrian, before you start. What would you usually give some practical suggestions? Is there anything other than these kind of dialogues, or is there other things that, you know, whether it be me personally or just people in rural America could do to be supported, to be to make a difference?
Okay. Yeah, let me touch on both of those. So we are three Baptist pastors, which means that we are children of Protestants. You know, so Martin Luther studied his Bible and saw a disparity between what he was reading and what he was seeing being practiced in the church in his day, which led to the Protestant Reformation. And so we see that protest is a very Baptist thing. It's a very Christian thing to protest against wrongs and injustices. And so one of the things we do is pray and protest. But we don't just march to be marching. We want to march with a purpose. The purpose is to correct the injustice that we're seeing in our society. So we protest, but we're calling for reforms in policing. We're calling for fair sentencing across the board for all citizens, not one rule of sentencing for Black people and one rule of sentencing for white people, one rule of sentencing for rich people, one rule of sentencing for poor people. We're calling for justice across the board. But the church also has to match its theology with its duology. I think Southern Baptist Convention has a history of
Duology.
Great theology. Southern Baptist Convention has a history of great theology, of rightly dividing the word. I think where we're suffering at is in duology. It's in practicing the great truths of the Bible that we see. If we were as passionate about the Great Commandment as we were about the Great Commission, we would see both explode. We would see salvation, or run off the chart. And this racism issue is an issue for the entire church to address. And so it's not just a Black problem. It's an American problem. So white Americans, Christian Americans, all Americans need to deal with it. And so going to your second question, Tim, what can you do? You can have biblical conversations with the people in your circle about the sin of racism and how they address it. How people turn a blind eye to it, laugh and joke about it, and then change their conversation when a Black person walks around, or things like that, or not calling out racism when you see it in one of your friends, family members, coworkers, whoever. But I think the church also needs to come together across the board and sit down and have conversations one with another about how does this make you feel? What is it like in your community? How are you experiencing these issues? And then how do we address it with the gospel as the church? So living out the Great Commandment would be the first step. I tell people to be mindful that you're seeking to live out the Great Commandment in your friendships, in your relationships, in your circle, that you are loving your neighbor as yourself. And so if you wouldn't want it to happen to you, then you shouldn't want it to happen to your neighbor. If you wouldn't want to go through it yourself, then you shouldn't put your neighbor through it. And so there's a lot that the church has been silent about on this issue, and the day for the church to be silent on this issue has passed. I think one of the great things that God is showing us in the midst of this pandemic is the depravity of our hearts. Just how messed up America really is, and how we've been looking past it in the name of getting on to the work or the busyness or production or whatever, and not dealing with the issues that are dividing us as a country. And so God has pulled back the sheet, pulled off the scab or whatever, and helped us to see just how messed up we are while we keep trying to tell ourselves, no, we're okay. Let's get back to work. No, we're not okay. Let's deal with these issues.
Thank you. Well, I've told you this privately. I've already said it on here. I'll probably say it to you many more times. I am grateful for both of you. I'm grateful what you're doing in your churches and your communities. I thank you for being examples as men, as husbands, as community leaders, as church leaders. I'm grateful for you, and I will fight the battle I can fight here, and I realize what you guys deal with is a whole different level than what I have an opportunity to deal with. But I will be praying for you, and I'm glad you're my friends. I've told you guys, if you hear something from me, see something from me, read something from me that you want to push back on, please do that. I want to do everything I can to represent Jesus and men like you well. And anytime you want to use one of my platforms as a voice, I want you to be here. And if you were closer, I remember, even if you're not closer, you want to drive down here, I'd be more than happy to have you on my stage at my church, right? I'd be more than happy to have you one of our Wednesday night worship nights. I'd be more than happy for you to bust down, a bunch of people and be with us. I probably ought to wait till the pandemic's over, but or we could just call it a protest and be okay with it, I guess. Maybe that's what we need to do.
Yeah, right.
I appreciate you guys. So thank you for being with me. Thank you for being vulnerable enough to put yourself out there and just being open. And so thank you very much. And for those who are watching tonight, thank you for watching, and we'll be back next week with another one of my friends. Thank you.
Good job.